Hello, friends. Welcome back. Another episode of Believe in Big Ten. Back here with you following another fantastic week of action in the conference. Rhett Lewis back here with you and welcoming my partner on our Big Ten Network broadcast. That's indeed right. Our play-by-play man, Guy Haberman, an absolute expert into business. Join us here this week. Also hosts the Guy Haberman podcast, where he does focus on the Bay Area and the San Francisco 49ers, who fell once again to the Kansas City Chiefs, but that's a topic for another day. Guy, what is on the docket here today is what we've seen from the Big Ten. You and I and Yogi Roth have made our Big Ten adventures here, and I'm just kind of curious before we get into some of the results, like what has kind of been your kind of big picture takeaway from watching Big Ten action now through 8 weeks of this season?
God, I mean, everything's a takeaway. Like, it's all so new. You know, Yogi and I were coming out of the Pac-12, and so we get to see, we got Oregon and we got SC. For me, it would, you know, obviously being like a dream to go to Nebraska.
Yeah.
You know, like having never done that. And then going to Indiana with you was awesome. And to go back this week to Indiana is just incredible. So, you know, I mean, it's, I don't know.
Seeing new places is kind of like,
the scene, you know, you realize pretty quickly that you can't get to every place in one season.
Right. Especially with an 18 team league.
There's not 18 games in a year.
Yeah.
But you know, like we went to Minnesota. Now they played SC, but that was awesome. And I think what's cool is you can feel the hit, you know, that is a original Big Ten member, right? That's a charter member of the league.
Yes.
And it's just the fan base is, then we had them at the Rose Bowl and there's Minnesota fans everywhere. Yeah. So it's not, you already knew it, but to be in it and feel every one of the teams, every one of the universities in the Big Ten has such huge dedicated fan bases that all it takes is a little spark and it just awakens. You know, I remember last year, my wife and I were in Chicago just for like for a quick little, we wanted to go to a couple Cubs games and see some friends. And it was the same weekend as the, it's like the Big Ten 10K.
Okay.
Or whatever. It's like a 5K run or a 10K run. And there's people everywhere that fly in to run in this, you know, charity race or whatever it is. And maybe they finish at Wrigley or something. And there's just, hotels are buzzing with people just repping their school and coming in for this Big Ten run. It's really cool. So I remember that last year going like, oh my God, this is different. You know?
And it's coast to coast now, man. I mean, like we've seen it on both coasts, having just come from the East Coast where we saw UCLA and Rutgers. And, you know, while those two teams, you know, are still kind of trying to find their way this season, we'll get to that in a moment. I think it just, again, you know, kind of speaks to the depth and maybe I should say width countrywide of this conference from coast to coast. And, you know, I think there's been a lot of cool moments that we've gotten a chance to be a part of. Obviously, Minnesota, you know, was a big one, but I go back to Nebraska too. And I'll kind of use this to push us forward to what we're going to see this week with Indiana, having just played Nebraska. But I mean, I just remember, you know, feeling that energy on that field, right? When they ran out and, you know, got to talk to Matt Rule right before kickoff. And the fact that those fans stayed with that program through some real lean years. And now look, they've run into some struggles and some obstacles here in this season, one that was filled with expectation. But as you mentioned it, like getting to see that place, like, again, that's a bucket list place to watch college football.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Let alone call a game.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I will ask you this. Do you remember about that? Like, one of the things that stuck out to me about that game in particular, as we kind of use it to paint a picture of what we saw this week with Indiana and Nebraska, it's like, I remember Northern Iowa kind of having some success offensively against that really talented Nebraska defense, right? Early on, especially.
Yeah, like they were physical.
Yeah.
Northern Iowa was physical. And we're like, what's going on here?
Right.
You know, and now Nebraska was coming off the Colorado game at that time.
That's right.
But yeah, it was eye-opening. I mean, last week was alarming, you know, understanding how dominant Indiana is. They're just such a well-oiled machine. That was an alarming performance. And I think really it was about, for all of the rightful conversation about Kurtis Rourke, their passing game, their running game. I mean, we were looking at the numbers today. They are one of 3 teams, top 10 in the nation in offensive and defensive yards per play. right? So they're chunk plays they're big plays on offense. They're not giving up a lot on defense.
Yeah.
And I think the offense has gotten understandably a lot of love, a lot of credit.
Yeah.
But they had Nebraska on its heels last week. I mean, that was pretty eye-opening. And
look, I obviously did a ton of, guest spots on shows going into last week, with Big Noon was there, and it was the Big Noon kickoff, not just the pregame show, but, Gus and Joel were on the call, and, Gus went nuts on that Sean Asbury touchdown, right? They got a football team now. And
I loved his open where he's like, he pretended like he was confused, and he's like, where are we? We're in Indiana? It was so good.
Yeah, I mean, first time 7-0 since 1945. I mean, you were asking me earlier, biggest game in Bloomington since when? I'm like, honestly, in
last week, but then before that,
right.
When?
In the last century, going back to 1980s, as I told you, when Anthony Thompson was running wild in college football and was a Heisman Trophy candidate. Those days have been few and far between. And so, when I was talking to people last week about this game, I was like, look, I've seen Nebraska. That's a talented football team. They got NFL players all over that defense. Ty Robinson, Nash Hutmaker, and you kind of go, up and down, from linebackers, secondary guys, and the whole deal. And we saw it up close and in person. Raiola looked like the real deal when we saw him. Again, that was against Northern Iowa, but had proven earlier in the season. I was like, this is a fourth quarter game. This is going to be a fourth quarter game, and this is where Indiana's going to have to flex their muscle, to try and continue. They had outscored opponents 80-17 in the fourth quarter coming into that game. I was like, that's why they have the edge. I'd expect it to go that. I mean, Matt Rule said as much, right? What do you say if you're a coach coming off a bye week and you get blown out by 49 points? I think you don't have a lot of answers at that point. No. And so. Man, I've been really impressed. And so I can't wait for you guys to kind of see, because we were there against Charlotte, right? And, look, it was a noon game and the atmosphere hadn't really gotten built up yet, right? It was only game 4 for Curt Cignetti, and they're kind of still trying to figure out what they were. And lo and behold, this is going to feel like I don't know what it feels like, Guy.
And you played there.
Right.
Yeah.
People are always asking me, what's it going to be like, man, when that stadium's packed? I was like, I don't know. Ask my dad. He was there the last time they went to the Rose Bowl in the 60s. That's the best I can give you right now.
Well, I loved on the maybe it was one of Tyson Lawton's early runs.
Yeah.
He had the big run on the first possession, right? Yeah. And they've got the game camera, and you're watching the play on TV, and then all of a sudden an arm goes up in the middle of it's like, well, no one's ever sat there before. They didn't know that they needed right?
You got to lift the cameras up.
That's the joke. Right. So it's really cool. It's really cool. I guess if you're Nebraska, you go, all right, we're still 5-2. We're 2. Now you got to play Ohio State. You're still evolving. Maybe it felt like you were a little ahead. Maybe you can still be ahead.
Yeah.
But they've got veterans on that team too, right? So that makes it all the more. Now they got a young quarterback, but that makes it all the more impressive what Indiana did. So it's now they got to do without Kurtis Rourke, who and I were texting about this yesterday. Of all of the 33 qualified quarterbacks that average 10 yards or more, on their average depth of target, right? How far down the field the receivers when they throw the ball. Only one in the country's completing 70% of his total passes, and he's 74%, right? For anyone who watches college football, that if you see a quarterback completing 74% of his balls, it tells you that player is good, but it also is kind of a red flag. I better go look and see how far he's throwing the football, because that's just
exactly. They're not taking dunks, right?
We've kind of reached the peak of human speed, people say, and we've kind of reached the peak of what you can your completion percentage if you're pushing the ball down the field, right?
Yeah.
When you see last year Bo Nix at Oregon was 77%, you're like, okay, that's good, but also how much are they throwing the ball down the field?
Right.
And so that's what's been really impressive is how they just spray the ball all over the place offensively. Yeah. And so it's going to be it adds to the intrigue this week. Now Tayven Jackson comes off the bench.
A name we know, a name folks in Bloomington know certainly very well. His older brother, Trayce Jackson-Davis, an absolute legend on the hardwood the last few years with Mike Woodson's team, and now right there in your neck of the woods with the Golden State Warriors.
So right before this, I just went and interviewed Trayce at the Warriors facility, and we sat down for like 10 minutes, and I asked him, what did you do to get your brother to commit to Indiana? And his answer was really illuminating. He's like, honestly, I said to him, are you sure you want to come here? The football program's kind of like, and he did like the hand gesture, like,
yeah.
So, that tells you all you need to know. Here's a guy's an All-American at Indiana telling his brother, is this what's best for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's what's cool, right? Here's a guy who goes to Tennessee, 4-star, Joe Milton's there. Like, they've got great quarterbacks, and they bring in a top 5 quarterback. And now he's got this chance with a new coaching staff to try and reach his potential, right? He started 5 games last year, gets benched.
Yeah.
This is a whole new opportunity.
And I tell you what, I mean, like, it's not just an opportunity for right now. Like, it's an opportunity for him to prove to this coaching staff that next year, when Kurtis Rourke's eligibility is exhausted, that he can be the guy, like, coming into spring ball. Like, this is my team now. I've shown you that I can win games for you. And maybe this thing doesn't have to be a competition with Tyler Cherry or with Mendoza, the 2 talented freshmen that this staff recruited. And, the others that they're going to bring in this coming year, which, by the way, was the biggest recruiting weekend in Indiana football history this last week.
Wow.
Absolutely sold out of recruit seating at this last game. So you know what it's going to be this week.
As most people, Curt Cignetti recruited at a high level, right?
Yes,
this is a recruiting coordinator at a high level of football. So, I mean, he knows
what rolling.
Winning, and like he said, like Jenny Taft asked him in the open, like, what do you think of all these fans? He's like, well, we're winning. Like, it's a simple formula.
Well, he used the more colorful word, I think, to describe it.
You can tell he caught himself. He wanted to say,
and last thing I'll say on this Indiana thing before we move on, I don't know how many programs who you could say that their 2 most talented wide receivers, like just on pure talent, stepped away from the program midseason, and it was kind of like, we're good. Like Donovan McCulley, who was their leading receiver a year ago, especially in the second half of the season, and now EJ Williams, who's left this year, both just weren't finding their way into the offense and have decided to pursue other opportunities with the whole redshirt thing. Yet that's not even a storyline with this team. Like, that's where Indiana has become. And I think that speaks to the talent evaluation part, Guy, because I mean, out of all the guys that have scored touchdowns for Indiana this year, I mean, maybe you got to look at how many Omar Cooper has. And I know Anderson Kobe has 1, but everyone else that has scored everyone else that has scored a touchdown for Indiana this year is new to the program this year. Like, that's nuts. And they've scored 28 rushing touchdowns, which is second only to Army in the country. It's just, it's kind of crazy to think about that.
It's now everyone understands like the level of self-confidence that Curt Cignetti brought. Yeah. But what you're hitting on is part of the new college football. Coaches have to consider, or maybe they don't have to. Maybe Curt Cignetti would say, I don't have to consider how much a player is making,
right? Or
what a player was promised, or what my collective is doing for a guy, or what a booster is saying to me. As long as you win, you can ignore that stuff. But if you have talented players that that people around the program knows about, those guys get money, right?
Yeah.
So that's it. It tells you a lot. Like, it's not surprising if you go look at the PFF target numbers. Those guys, they're not throwing on the ball,
right?
Right. In that standpoint, it's not surprising at all.
No, but it speaks to talent evaluation and how important that is in today's world. Yeah. Like, to bring that much production in, or that many different players in, and get this type of production from it is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to remind you, BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything sports betting. Every stat, matchup breakdown, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during games. The largest catalog of odds on everything from football, MLB playoffs, NHL, NBA to political props. When the game's over, head over to our online casino, get in a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. Bet Online. The game starts here. I want to talk to you a little bit, Guy, about the number one team in the country right now, the Oregon Ducks, who we saw in week 1 of college football, and leaving Autzen Stadium that day, that did not feel like the number one team in the country. From, the time that you've spent, obviously before this year covering Oregon and Dan Lanning, and now, having done that game with our crew, what could you say about what Dan Lanning's done to kind of continue the evolution of his team in the landscape of a season in which they have gotten better week over week and game over game?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to zoom out a little further and say, hey, there are a lot of things. I think Oregon fans were not heartbroken when Mario Cristobal left. Mm-hmm. But I think you also have to give him credit. Like, he really made the concerted effort to make sure that they got back to kind of what they were doing under Chip, and then continued from a personnel standpoint for a little bit under Helfrich, which was really build the lines. Like, Mario Cristobal really committed to offensive and defensive line size. He had been at Alabama most recently before he came to Oregon. And then obviously Dan Lanning comes in from Georgia. Sure. And of course he's going to want to do the same thing. But that's been the stereotype, and it's been an accurate stereotype of West Coast football programs. They just have not. And you talk to people, they're like, I had a coach say to me last week, he's like, there's not enough meat eaters on the West Coast. He's like, too much vegan eating on the West Coast. Like, he was joking, but he was serious.
Yogi.
Yeah. And it was a coach. Yeah, I mean, it was a West Coast coach, assistant coach. So that's been a thing. And I remember for years, Oregon had a defensive coordinator who was an awesome coach named Nick Aliotti, who I worked with at Pac-12 Network. And he would say, like, we can't find. He had DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead on the same defensive line. Like, those guys are both 6'7", 6'8", humongous. He's like, we cannot find those people. They don't exist out here as much. But when you have Oregon's money, right, and commitment to winning, you recruit nationally. I saw Jed Fish said last week, he's like, oh, Ohio State, Oregon, that was an interesting game of $20 million rosters. That was the comedy. So Lanning, you have to commit to that. If you're trying to win a national championship, right? If you want to, especially in the playoff era where attrition now that these seasons are going to get so long, right? The football season, if you're a playoff team, is much longer. So you need more bodies, you need bigger bodies, you need to be able to hold up physically, that sort of thing. Yeah. What really stood out to me when I went to an Oregon camp practice before the season, and I didn't quite know. I'd watched Dillon Gabriel just like everybody else, and I'd seen the numbers. And watching one practice gave me a lot of confidence in him. And I think a lot of people probably had a lot of confidence anyway. He's an established player. You don't need to see a practice. But what I thought coming out of that practice, my kind of headline on Dillon Gabriel was, I think he's just going to hit all the layups. And I think we've all watched enough college football to know that in a given year, there's like 15 fan bases that are okay with it, that like their quarterback, right? That aren't trying to bench their guy, maybe. Yeah. And so if you're gonna just hit the layups and then also do more, like, I don't want to denigrate. Dillon does so much more than just hit the layups, but just as a baseline, if you play mistake-free football, it's going to put you in the top, 2% of college quarterback. Now, he doesn't always do that, right? He's thrown red zone interceptions. Like, I'm not saying he's perfect, but I just came out of there thinking, like, that guy's the missing piece. Yeah. And then the other thing with Lanning is he's got, in a different way, what we're talking about with Cignetti, he just is so confident. They did not play a perfect game against Ohio State, and they won anyway. Yeah. And I think that is the telltale sign of a good team. It's just like in life, you do not have you don't. Congrats on throwing a no-hitter with your A stuff. Right. Where do you do the other 29 starts as a pitcher? That's really what life is, and that's what college football is. Yeah. So, and I think that's what's cool. It's just like they can ride the roller coaster and still find ways to win. So
indeed, because they go to the doctor.
They got a big game this week.
In fact, they do. Number 20 Illinois coming to Autzen Stadium there in Eugene, a ranked-on-ranked matchup after Illinois just took down Michigan in a ranked on ranked matchup, which was a really kind of fun broadcast. If you were watching with the old timey filters that they were putting on the whole thing and the mics, CBS did it up for that one, and they've got the call this week for Illinois and Oregon. One last thing to get to with you here, Guy. We're going to talk some UCLA Rutgers here in just a moment. First, want to remind you, you got to get the lid. You got to get the Melin hat, because if you're catching up with us here regularly on Believe in Big Ten, then you know that I love my hats. And if you don't have the Melin, you're doing it wrong here, folks. You need a hat to keep up with you. That's where Melin comes in. These are not your average hats. Melin makes the most premium and durable headwear in the world. So whether you're, recording a podcast or maybe tailgating at the grass lots across from the Rock in Bloomington, getting set for a big IU game against Washington, or maybe walking around Haymarket near Memorial Stadium in Lincoln, working out on the golf course, or just heading out for a date night, you need a Melin hat. Built to last 5 times longer than any other hat. They've got different collections for you. The Hydro collection, if you're going to be in and out of the water. They've got the Thermal collection for you when the temperatures start dropping. So from USC in LA to Rutgers in Piscataway, Melin has a hat for you. Check them out. You won't wear anything else after you get one for yourself. Rhett Lewis, Guy Haberman here with you.
It's my only golf hat, Rhett. It's my only golf hat.
Now we're talking, Guy.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying right there, bud. You had some fantastic calls this week. Invite anybody to check out any highlights you can find from our Fox Sports 1 broadcast of UCLA and Rutgers. Guy was in his bag with the touchdowns we saw in this one, which was a UCLA win, their first ever Big Ten win. 155 years in the making for college football. Is that essentially what we said to get a Big Ten win and to get a matchup against Rutgers in particular? First ever time those two teams got together. What we spent the last 2 weeks with UCLA, and what was your kind of thought process leaving that game after feeling? I kind of felt like UCLA was getting closer, right? After the game against Minnesota. Did you feel like this was kind of on the way with the way that Deshaun Foster's program had been progressing? Yeah,
and I understand too. Like I was talking to Wayne Cook, is the sideline analyst for UCLA. Yes. He played football at UCLA, and I was talking to him on the field before the game. He's like, nobody's talking about us, and he wasn't annoyed. He's like, he said, because it's an 18-team league, and we're not any good, right? Like we're not winning games. Right. So his point was just, when you're in a league that big, like you have to win a lot to get noticed.
Right.
So they, someone might be listening, like, why are you guys talking about UCLA right now? And part of it's like, well, we just had them twice. But I will tell you, and maybe it should be said, because what most people saw of Deshaun Foster was that the introductory press conference at the Big Ten. And I had not met him before we did games 2 weeks ago. I'd heard great things about him, but I'd not met him. And you just come away so impressed by him in terms of the way he thinks about football, but also the way he thinks about leadership and coaching. And he has such a clear vision for what it's supposed to be. And you just come away going like, I hope this works out.
Yeah.
Because it's unique when you go to your alma mater, right? And Scott Frost is a great example of that. And it's got to be a lot, especially when you're a young guy, because you're like, this is where I want to be forever.
Yeah.
If they fire me in 5 years, I'm like, I don't know, whatever his age. I'm 42. Like,
right.
I'm 45. Like, I got a whole career. Right. I don't want to leave. Yeah. So he really wants to make it work. And I thought, to your point, it was impressive to see it. You just never know when a team's losing. Like, how are they going to react? And I thought it was one thing. They lost to Penn State. They'd lost to Oregon, right? That's Indiana, one thing. Yeah. They lost to Indiana. That's one thing. You can kind of rally, like, hey guys, we're not on that level yet, but maybe we can. And then you play a good game with Minnesota, and then you lose. And that's when I thought they had a big letdown opportunity.
Sure.
And look, admittedly, Rutgers is dealing with a ton of injuries right now. Yeah. Like there's a reason they're scoring against Wisconsin and then losing. They've got some injuries, but those Rutgers coaches told us, like, guys, this UCLA team has a ton of speed and athleticism.
Yeah, and they were right. And they were right. Was the big
they were right.
Like mismatch, like for me on the field was the speed of UCLA against Rutgers. And look, again, injuries, big part of that. But UCLA got it done for sure. And look, let's see what this propels, what this propels them to. First Big Ten win ever. See how many, if they can rack up any more here moving forward. For Rutgers, though, boy, got to hit the road on a short week to battle USC at the Coliseum in a game that is 11 o'clock body clocks kickoff.
Dude, how about that though? Yankees, Dodgers, right?
Yep.
Rutgers, SC, back to back that night.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't even think about it that way in terms of timing, right?
But also the market, Yankees, Dodgers leading into Rutgers, USC on Fox.
Oh man. Yeah, that's huge. Holy smokes.
New York, Jersey, LA. Like that's pretty cool. It worked out pretty well for Fox on that one.
That is pretty cool. Yeah. 11 a.m. or 11 p.m. Eastern time kick on Fox, or whenever the game ends, I guess. Right. We'll see how they end up working that out. Guys, it's been fun, bud. I appreciate you, man. Look forward to getting to Bloomington with you here this week. And for all of you listening here, we'll have a bigger preview of Indiana, Washington coming up for you here in our next show later this week. And also preview a bit more on that Oregon, Illinois game, which is turning out to be one of the biggest games in the conference this week as well. All on the way as we continue here on Believe in Big Ten. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll catch you next time.